So obviously, one of the fundamental skill sets that you are going to need to develop as a lawyer is how to effectively communicate with your client. And I have some thoughts on that I think would be helpful to you as a new lawyer as you begin to meet with clients, depending on whether they're consumers, not very sophisticated, business people. It doesn't matter. The dynamic between lawyer and client is kind of the same. The problem, I think, is that the way that lawyers think is not like other people. And as you were trained in law school, how to be rational, how to analyze a case, the Socratic method, how to argue, that works very well in litigation. And when you're dealing with other lawyers, that's what we are trained to do. And I can tell you, as you expand into your practice, as you interact with more lawyers, you will begin to think much differently than non-lawyers. And that could be a problem when you're trying to have an effective relationship with your client. You're trying to communicate, both to communicate what your advice is and to also listen to what your client is telling you. There's some things you might want to keep in mind. The one we talked about in another video, and that is to listen. And we're trained as adversaries, right? So that when someone says something, we want to react, we want to make our next point, we want to win, okay? And there's nothing wrong with that if you're in litigation or if you're in a contract negotiation or whatever it might be. But when you're trying to have a conversation with a non-lawyer, that doesn't work so well. And if your client thinks that you're not listening to them, that what they're saying is just not being communicated, you don't care about their needs or their interests or their problems, and what they're saying isn't important because you're dismissing what they're saying. But if you listen, genuinely listen, I'm not saying that this is something, kind of a front that you're putting on. You genuinely want to hear what they have to say. They're going to get the feeling that you do feel about, what they have to say. You do give some value to their input. So listen very carefully when you're speaking with your clients. They're going to be much more apt to share things that are important to the case when they feel that you're listening to them. If they feel that you're dismissing them, you're not listening to them, they may withhold information that could be very valuable to your case. Number two, I would say know your audience. Some clients, you're able to use legal terminology. You're able to use complex concepts and speak in terms that maybe you would speak to another lawyer. Other clients, you're not going to be able to do that. You may have to use analogies and things to explain to the client. And if you just have one way of communicating with clients, that's going to be a problem for you. You have to be very aware of who your audience is. Some people react to rational thought, analytic thought. Other folks are more emotional. They react more to feelings. And if you can get a feel for what your audience is, what side of the fence they are on this, and you can then adjust how you speak to them, you're going to have a more effective communication. Number three, don't talk like a lawyer thinks. Now, I just talked about that a little bit. We think logically, rationally. We think that, as far as litigation, for example, emotions, feelings really have no place. We're trying to make our point, our counterpoint. Again, we're trying to win. But in a conversation with your client, winning isn't the object. Communicating is the object. And so you have to understand that most non-lawyers don't think like we do. You have to adjust how you speak to these people when you're trying to even communicate complex concepts. You have to kind of put it in layman's terms sometimes, and you have to maybe appeal to emotion or feelings, which isn't something you would normally do if you were dealing with another lawyer. Number four, don't be reactive. Again, what are we taught to do? we're adversaries. That's our job. So you make a point, I have a counterpoint. You make a point to that, I'm thinking about what my next point here is going to make. It's a debate, it's a challenge. But you're communicating with your client. It's not a game. Nobody's trying to win. You're not trying to make a counterpoint. So if your client tells you something, don't be so anxious to say, well, I want to react to that. I'm going to make a counterpoint. Listen to what they're saying. If you listen carefully, you're going to be able to pick up what they really want and be able to interact with them rather than being reactive and trying to make a point to their point. So these are some of the things that you should, I think, keep in mind as you're developing your skill set so that you can effectively communicate with your clients.